Yeah, and it's saying, my lag's kind of spiking up and down. I guess everyone in Germany is watching Netflix at this point in time, so.
Yeah, that's true.
Probably it.
And actually, it's quite interesting. Even though seeing your face is quite good for reactions, but also if I don't see you, or I can see, like if I just focus on talking to the microphone, which might make the sound quality a bit better.
So I'm just too distractingly beautiful. That's the problem.
Maybe that is the problem.
Roll the music.
Oh shit. Welcome to the Gaps in Knowledge podcast. I'm Rhys and I'm a geographer that knows nothing about history.
And I'm Will, I'm a historian and I know nothing about geography.
And to celebrate the unification of Germany today, I'll be getting lost looking for German islands, discovering German dialects and falling on fiery mountains in the fatherland.
And because I'm a strange creature, I've taken the idea of unification and applied it to history with maths, philosophy, quantum physics, and of course cookery, because we're looking at Pythagoras, the man, the maths, the myths, the wizard. Was his theorem discovered or invented? What on earth or in maths did he think he was doing? And why you should never trust a bean.
A bean? Oh God, I've got to change my dinner again. Sorry.
Right, I think it's my turn to go first, isn't it? Or did you go first?
I'll tell you what, you go first. I think I may have gone first last time with the royal stuff and the GCSE stuff. So yeah, I think it's you to go first.
That's right. Okay.
Yep.
Well, normal service has resumed this week, which means, of course, doing things for absolutely no rhyme or reason. And my theme this week, for no reason, is Pythagoras. So... My question to you, my misconception is, who discovered Pythagoras' theorem?
Oh, for God's sake, you can't ask that question when it's in the name. It's like, oh my God. That's genuinely a really unfair question. Is there a committee I can bring that up with? So I'm going to say Pythagoras, and you're going to tell me.
I mean, have you ever listened to an episode of Gaps in Knowledge? How are you still? This is what, episode 12? How are you still doing this?
I don't know. But I don't know. Mr. Triangle.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question. Like, what do you remember of Pythagoras' theorem?
Well, it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared, isn't it? It's how to measure the hypotenuse of a triangle. So, and I have seen videos before about how you can use a square to kind of prove it, and you change the dimensions of a square into rectangles, and you can see how everything is interlinked and everything is relative to one another, and you can see it actually in action. But I don't know who's actually invented it. Like, it sounds like to me it might be a Roman or a Greek thing. I have no idea. Someone back there. Am I in the right ballpark or totally in a different sport? Kind of. But the thing is, I would take issue with the word invented, because the thing is with Pythagoras' theorem is the same thing with quite a few of mathematical things. It appeared in different cultures not far off the same time, although sometimes there was quite a big gap of hundreds of years each time. And so, for example, the Egyptians discovered it about 1800 years before Christ. It came up in Mesopotamia, so ancient Iraq, roughly the same time. But then you got to jump forward 1,200 years before it appears in India, and then it appears in China at about the same time. So the idea that one person invented it doesn't quite work. It's more a discovery of how the world works rather than an invention. So I've heard I've heard something this before, where things like are discovered around. They all sort of happen at similar times. People discover that or find out the same thing and then claim it's their own invention. But actually, it happened at the other side of the world as well in a similar manner. Is this the road we're going down now?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And this happens quite often in maths. There was quite a famous one with calculus, which is quite an advanced form of maths, was discovered at roughly the same time by Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz. So two people working completely independently discover the same way of describing the world in more or less the same way, completely independently. And the same thing's kind of true with Pythagoras. But that leads to a philosophical question, which is, okay, well, what actually are they describing here? What are these numbers? And that's what my main thing's going to be about once we get there. Like, what are these numbers? What did Pythagoras think he was doing? And ultimately, who was Pythagoras? Okay. But the short answer to the question is, Pythagoras definitely didn't discover Pythagoras' theorem. Pythagoras was basically a wizard. And it was probably one of his followers who found the theorem and named it after him, in the same way that, I don't know, the Queen Elizabeth II Bridge is named after Queen Elizabeth, or that kind of thing. It's named after him to venerate him, not because he found it, which obviously leads to the question, who is this guy?
Yeah, who the hell is he then? Is he just some guy I imagined it was some guy who was just drawing triangles on a piece of paper and trying to work out how to measure them. Like, that's how Pythagoras is in my head. But it turns out he's just some bloke who people name crap after.
Absolutely. He's not just some bloke. He is a wizard. And what I mean by that, you're going to have to stay tuned for the main event where I'm going to tell you all about Pythagoras. And hopefully my intention on this glorious Unification Day morning is to completely melt your mind.
Okay, shall we go into my misconception corner?
Yes, lure me in.
Well, I've gone for a theme, and I thought it would be very apt because it is Germany's Unification Day. All of my facts are German-based. So I thought that would be an appropriate thing to do. So my question to you is how many distant island territories does Germany have?
I like how that's a very gaps in knowledge question as well, but for completely opposite reasons from mine. Distant island territories. Well, Germany was stripped of her colonies after the First World War. So none.
Oh, okay. So you say none, and I asked this to one of our listeners, Jamie. I asked him just to trial this question. He said none as well, and then when I told him the answer, he was like, I'm not sure, but I'm going to go with it because there is one, and I'm going to say Heligoland, which is an island 43 kilometers out of the North Sea. Does that count?
Come on, man. Come on. So, put me in the Jamie camp for this one.
Oh, no.
43 kilometers. All right. Is that distant, I guess, is the question you're asking. I mean, you can't see it with the naked eye.
True, and I might have just misled you. It's 44 miles. I've just read my fact is 70 kilometers. So it's a bit further away.
That makes a world of difference then, that extra 26 miles.
It's a marathon extra away.
May as well be the Falkland Islands at this stage.
Well, that was kind of trying to how I was picturing in my head, so I might have been quite mean. But I think the reason I say this is because, as you've already alluded to, is that Germany was stripped of all of its colonies, so you don't associate with Germany having any territories beyond its mainland, really. So I thought it was a reasonable stretch to talk about Heligoland, which is a small, tiny island in the North Sea, which initially, actually, in its history, was owned by Denmark, and then at one point, the British Isles as well. So it's had a few ownerships. However, it's a Frisian German island that sort of sits sort of west of Denmark and north of Germany, sort of northwest of Germany, I suppose, right in the middle of the North Sea. But yeah, so. Heligoland. So, do you know how many people live on Heligoland?
I'm picturing like an oil rig. So like 3 people and a dog is what I'm thinking.
It has 34 islands, in fairness.
Okay.
And so it's 34 islands, and on the island there are 1,650 people that live on it.
Oh wow!
So it's got quite a significant amount. But there's 2 main islands. So they have one island where most people live, and they call that, of course, in German, the Hauptinsel, the main island. And there's another one called Duna, which is in the east, and it's just a tiny island surrounded by sand. But I'll just give you a little bit of a rundown. So there's only really one way in which you can reach Heligoland, and it's if you come out of northwest Germany in sort of a fishing town called Cuxhaven. You can leave the River Elbe, and there's like boats that go there and ferries that go there. But that's pretty much the only way, because the island's only a kilometre squared, so you can't have an airport or anything on it. So it's that small. Mm-hmm. And so you can only take boats up to there. It's quite famous for having lots of seagulls, as you can imagine. Yeah. And there are songs.
You're not selling me on it.
No, not the
so
moment. No. But yeah, it's a little triangular shaped island, and it's a little bit like it's like a big hill that just pops out of the ocean, and it's got your famous sort of like geographical stacks and stumps, and you can see the bedding planes that go through the geology of there. But it sort of goes in downhill to sort of the main sort of downtown Heligoland, which isn't really that big, really. But it has like a little hospital there, and it has a couple of schools, and enough to support a village of about 1,500 or so people. But it's it's one of those places that people probably don't know exists, and it's a little island in the middle of the North Sea, which is German. And do you know anything about its language in sort of these islands in northwest Germany?
Well, you mentioned it's Frisian, and Frisian is not a million miles away from Flemish and Dutch, but not a million miles away from English, as far as I know. It's kind of halfway in between the two, I think. Is that right?
You're pretty much you're pretty much there. So as you've already talked about Pythagoras, you're going to expand on it further. I'm going to say exactly the same thing with Frisian as well. We're going to go down that road. But it has its own, in Frisian, it has its own specific dialect called Heligolandic, which I think is quite nice. That rolls really nicely off the tongue. But it's only spoken by about 500 people on the island itself. But it is in the same notion like Manx, which is a language spoken on the Isle of Man. They're trying to revive it, so it's now being spoken in schools and taught in schools, and there's much more print of local newspapers in Heligolandic. So they're trying to revive the North Frisian language on the island. But yeah, don't forget about northern German islands. They do have some. I think that and maybe Zult might be the other one. There's not many, but let us not forget them.
I mean, as far as colonies goes, it's not like South Africa or India or something. But so Heligoland, presumably, if we go back kind of before the last ice age, this is part of Doggerland. Is that right?
Yes, it would be.
The Doggerbank. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those little mountains that would have poked out above the plains before the seas rose.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So
I always find these little island territories so interesting because, like, either people have lived there untouched for thousands of years, which I think is probably nonsense, or some poor German fisherman got swept so far off course that he ended up there and couldn't find his way back. And that's how people live there.
Yeah.
Very strange places.
Yeah, that's Mr. Heligoland on his fishing journey. Swept off. And started.
Swept off and decides, it's my cliff.
This is it. This is where I live now. And he's had lots of seagulls as pets.
So I've called my main article this week, Wizards Exist and They Study Maths. So strap in.
Wow.
It's going to start strange and get stranger because my first question is, where are numbers?
What? That sounds like the question hasn't finished. Have you finished asking that question?
Nope. Where are numbers? Where do numbers take place? Because I mean, and this is this is all linked with Pythagoras. The thing is, we can describe things around us using numbers. So numbers are kind of an adjective. For example, you can have 1 cup of tea with 2 spoons of sugar in it and 30 milliliters of milk. That is using numbers to describe a cup of tea.
Yeah.
With me so far?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm all right. I'm committed to this journey. Go on.
We're in. Okay.
But
the thing is, what does that number actually mean by itself? If you're not referring to a cup of tea, what is the number one talking about? What is the number two talking about, etc., etc.?
But isn't it like colour? It's that sort of thing. Like colour on its own is meaningless because it actually links to a particular thing that you observe with a sense. Is it like describing green is really hard or impossible? Like describing what the number one is surely is impossible alone without it linking or being relative to something.
Well, the thing is, I mean, it's funny that you mention colour because colour is an interesting case. Colour is not too far off sound in that, yes, it can, the easiest way of describing it is in reference to something else, like a green leaf or a blue sky. But colour can also be captured, or bronze sky. Sorry,
bronze sky.
You're right. Excuse me. Sorry to any ancient Greek listeners. I can only apologise. Don't worry about what blue is. Bronze, it's bronze. You're right. But the thing is, colour can also be described mathematically. It's a wavelength of light. It's the speed at which a photon vibrates, or the electromagnetic.
Because technically speaking, you could have the Doppler effect of colour.
Yeah, you can, absolutely. Redshift, it's how you measure the speed at which galaxies are moving in space. Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So is this helping us get closer to an answer? Well, no, not really, but stick with me. Because, I mean, if we take another example of a mathematical object, like a shape, a circle.
Okay.
We can all picture a circle in our brain. Like, listener, try and picture a circle in your brain. The thing is, the perfect circle that we can all absolutely understand, you can picture a... Whoops. Can you still hear me?
I can. Something went weird then.
Okay. Yeah, my guitar fell over. Why have I got a guitar? You'll find out later.
Oh, God.
I have had too much coffee.
What the hell is going on in this episode? What have you, like, are you sure you've just had too much coffee? Is your wife slipped something else in there? Because I don't know where we're going.
I did have some Marmite crumpets for breakfast.
Okay, maybe that's a concoction that is causing this to happen. I have no idea. Okay, I'm still here. I'm on it.
Yeah. Okay, good. The idea of a circle. The thing is, there is no such thing as a perfect circle in the physical world. We have circle-like things. I mean, you can imagine the top of a bottle or the rim of a mug or the, a circle of a plant pot. These are all circles I can see around me. Except if you look at them very closely, they're not really circles. So where is this circle?
What are they?
What is a circle?
I'm starting to doubt my own existence now with all of this.
Well, I'm going to break you down and then rebuild you up, but in maths. Okay. This is basically what I'm doing to you, what you are currently experiencing, completely against your own will, no doubt, is the philosophy of maths. Right. What is maths is the question. And there's two basic answers. The first answer is that maths is something made up by human beings to describe the physical world. It doesn't actually exist other than the way in which we use it. Okay. So therefore, the whole question is meaningless. One cup of tea, you can't take the one away from the cup of tea because you're just describing the cup of tea. Does that make sense?
Yep. I'm there.
Okay.
I'm still there.
Excellent. I don't know if anyone else is, but
no,
we're in this together.
I'm clinging on.
But that's not what Pythagoras believed. What Pythagoras believed is that maths exists without human beings, that you don't need human beings to describe the maths for the maths to exist. But 1 + 1 = 2 is always true, regardless of whether or not there's a human being to see it. When he's investigating things like triangles, like circles, what he thinks he's doing is not describing our world. Pythagoras thinks he's describing an eternal world of perfect ideas, perfect shapes, perfect numbers. And that for Pythagoras, a human being is unique because it can access this perfect eternal world.
I bet he doesn't believe in decimal points. It's either 1 or 2. There's no 1.5 in Pythagoras' life. That's what it sounds like to me.
Do you know what? Funnily enough, you are exactly correct, because the way that they visualize numbers wasn't as kind of the digit 1, which you can draw as a straight line, or the digit 2, which is a curly line with a straight line under it. They visioned it as pebbles. Individual pebbles. So 1 pebble is 1, 2 pebbles is 2 pebbles, 3 pebbles is 3 pebbles. And if you arrange it into a triangle, you get a nice little 3 pebble triangle, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're right. Yeah. Anyway, that's a diversion from what is already a very bizarre diversion. So
yeah, I think out of all things that you've talked about, this is the most dangerous piece of work to go off on a tangent because I might get lost into the wormhole somewhere, never get out of it.
We are going so far into the weeds that I don't know if the concept of weeds is going to exist by the end of it.
Oh God, so, you've just taken away our route out.
So for Pythagoras then, okay, does it actually matter what the philosophy of maths is? No, it doesn't matter. You can decide for yourself. But the thing that I'm interested in here is what the hell did Pythagoras think he was doing?
Absolutely.
Because basically what he thought he was doing was channeling this eternal world of maths. He saw himself not as the bloke you saw before with a pencil and a piece of paper doing sums. He saw himself as a medium between the realm of the gods and the realm of the human being. He saw himself as a wizard, essentially.
Okay, so he's hoping that he goes to Hogwarts. Obviously that hasn't been invented yet, but he is Dumbledore.
But he would argue that Hogwarts has always existed in the mathematical world.
Oh God!
And he's just accessing it.
Must be an absolute drain at a party. I mean,
well, funnily enough, the music was pretty good, but the food was weird because let me tell you about Pythagoras a bit. He was around about 500 BC, a little bit before 550 or so. And there's not a lot of information about him as an individual, but what we do have is a lot of information from his followers and really from his worshippers, because he was seen as a prophet, because he can speak to this realm beyond the human realm, which is the realm of maths. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, I've got that. Yeah.
And so he sets up a commune in a place called Croton, which is in the south of Italy. It's, if you picture Italy as a boot, it's right on the sole of the Italian boot.
Okay.
And he lives in a cave because of course he does.
Of course
He's
he does.
a wizard.
Why? Yeah.
And he doesn't speak to anybody except for his very closest advisors because of course he doesn't. He's a wizard. And he gathers followers around him and they spend their time following his wizardly ways to try and perfect themselves. It is essentially a religious cult. And it's a cult based around a couple of ideas. Number one, there is a soul and the soul leaves the body after death. Number two, eating meat is therefore evil because animals have souls.
Right.
And number three, eating beans is also evil because beans have souls.
Why beans?
And I'll talk about that more later.
What?
That'll be my number time.
Oh, God. What a journey.
So what we have then is we don't have a scholar. We have a wizard. And the question is, what does he think Pythagoras' theorem is doing that makes him convinced that he is a wizard? Well, let's have a look at Pythagoras' theorem a little bit more.
Okay.
What Pythagoras thinks is going on here is, or at least as far as I can tell, I'm not Pythagoras, to be clear. I'm not a wizard. I'm just a very naughty boy. What Pythagoras thinks is going on here is that it's Life of Brian. You've never seen Monty Python?
Yeah, but it was totally unexpected. It caught me off guard. Oh, God. Okay. Refocus.
Rhys,
I'm back on the train.
As an Englishman, you must be aware that we're never more than about 5 seconds from some kind of Monty Python opportunity.
That's
just
true,
what
actually.
Big English is.
That is true, to be fair. Yeah.
Pythagoras looks at a lot of things in nature and thinks, hang on a minute, that looks like a triangle. Think of a volcano. The profile of a volcano looks like a triangle. If you think of how a landslide falls in one straight line, but then at some point it will expand outwards. And as it expands outwards, it looks like a triangle. Mm-hmm. The shape of the delta of a river looks like a triangle. That's why it's called a delta, because the Greek letter delta looks like a triangle. The wings of a butterfly, the shape of a pine tree, lots of these things are kind of triangular. And what Pythagoras believes is that they're not triangular by accident. They're triangular because they are borrowing from this theory of triangles from the pure world of maths.
Okay. So is he, so hang on, just interject a little bit. Are we going down the line of Pythagoras as the inventor of pure mathematics?
No.
Oh, God. Oh, I thought I had it. Back in the boat.
No, but I see why you'd say that. There's two problems with that. One is the the kind of straightforward problem that he didn't invent these ideas. These ideas predated him. People had been doing maths before Pythagoras came along. Okay. He just takes it in a bit of a weird direction. But people had already been coming up with these ideas and thinking through the ideas of what actually is maths before Pythagoras gets there. My second quibble, which we can always edit out, is whether or not it's invented or discovered. But that's kind of the whole question.
Okay.
Like, what is maths? Is it something we've invented? Is it something we've discovered? I'm not sure is my basic answer.
No,
I think it might be discovered.
But the thing is, this is so funny because earlier when you were talking about this, I thought of the phrase, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there, does it make a sound? And then that's a very famous thought experiment and philosophical idea. And I'm always on the argument of that if a sound has to be both made and received for it to be complete, therefore it doesn't make a sound because no one's there to receive that information. And I kind of feel like that's Pythagoras' deal, is that he's going down that kind of route of philosophy, like what is things, what is stuff, and that's kind of where he's going with this. But I mean, and in his wizardy ways, like what is the criteria, by the way, of wizard? Like that's one question I do have here.
Yeah, good question. But the way that I'm defining wizard here is somebody who is at the portal between two different realms. Okay. If we think of kind of your traditional Gandalf or your Saruman wizard, then they're in this world, they're in Middle Earth, but they can access the world of the gods to create magic and create spells.
Okay, so they're like the guardians of the tunnel between two worlds, which they only have access
to.
Right, okay.
Exactly, yes. And so I think there's a very good argument to be made that Pythagoras is doing exactly the same thing, but with a different world, or at least he would say that. The world that he's accessing isn't really a world of magical spells, it's a world of maths.
Right.
Although you could argue that maths is just magic spells at the end of the day. But let's not go down there. That's dark and dangerous paths.
It is, yeah. So where are we? Where are we currently? Are we in the weeds? Are we deep? Are we just? Are our heads?
We are kind of as deep in the weeds as we're going to get, because we're going to find a path out of these weeds.
Good, because
back to the real world. Because don't worry, I'm not going to leave you hanging.
I need to gasp for breath at some
to your
point.
Dante, like. Don't worry, I'm not going to take you to the River Styx and just abandon you there at the foot of the underworld. We're going all the way through.
That would be mentally unfair.
It would be. So, to reiterate that point then about triangles, basically what Pythagoras thinks is that what we see in this real world relates to the mathematical world. It draws upon that mathematical world because the circles that we see described around us in that teacup, in that pot, in that light shade, whatever it might be, you can describe them using maths. Mm-hmm. You can say that this shape that I see in front of me can be described in maths. And actually you can do that quite easily using pi, for example. You can describe how long that shape is on a circle fairly easily in maths.
So you're saying that mass entity is just a big adjective?
Oh, what do you mean by that?
Like, so maths in itself is just there to describe things only.
That would be the anti-Pythagorean way of seeing things. What Pythagoras would say is that the maths is what the actual thing is. Okay. But what we are interacting with is a description of the actual thing.
Okay, so what's happened there is you've taken me down this hole and I'm trying to get out, but I've gone in reverse. I'm looking back where I've just come from.
We've got to make sure that we've understood this cave before we can start finding our way back out of the cave, because otherwise it's not quite going to work. The way that you are seeing things at the moment is the formalist view of the philosophy of maths. That it's made up. It's a game. Maths is just a big game used to describe reality. Pythagoras has it the other way around. Reality is maths. And that what we are doing is interacting with maths. We just dress it up in these weird ways because we're human beings. But actually all we're doing is messing about with maths. When I see a color, then what I'm seeing isn't the object itself. I'm seeing the wavelengths of that light, and my brain is interpreting those wavelengths, which are maths. A wavelength is maths, and my brain is interpreting that in a particular way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Now I'm turned round. I'm now on the ready for the journey out of this. I've got Pythagoras' mindset, and I'm through his lens. I've got it. It's there.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, let's take Pythagoras' journey out into what is really quite a lovely conclusion that he draws. One day, Pythagoras is walking through the town, and he goes to a blacksmith, and the blacksmith is hammering away, because that's what blacksmiths do. Mm-hmm. But as he's hammering away, he picks up a second hammer and starts hammering away with that one. So we've got two hammers going at once. And the first hammer, Pythagoras noticed, makes a sound. And it doesn't really matter what the sound is, but let's just say the sound is dum. That's the sound of the hammer. Dum. Mm-hmm. And the second hammer makes a sound that kind of relates quite nicely. Dum. So we've got the first hammer, dum. Second hammer, dum, 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 dum. You can hear that there's a relationship between those notes, right?
Yes.
Yes, that kind of sounds like there's something going on there that's kind of interesting. You're with me so far?
I'm with you. Yep, I'm there.
Pythagoras takes those hammers and he weighs them. But why does he do that? Because he's mental.
Yep,
that's just what wizards do. They do weird things. And he finds out the first hammer, let's say it weighs the same as 100 silver coins. Okay. That's the one that goes dum. That's 100 silver coins. The smaller one, dum, that weighs 66 silver coins.
Aha.
The ratio between the two hammers is 2 to 3. Now, why is that interesting? Well, because he takes this idea home and he gets some wires and he hangs those wires up and he cuts them to certain lengths. Oh. And if he's got one wire that is, let's say, 1 meter long, then the next wire he makes 2/3 of a meter long. And he finds exactly the same thing. In fact, what he heard, I say going to my guitar, probably sounded something like this. Can you hear that?
I can, yes.
What he's discovered is that if you take a wire that is 1 unit long and then a second wire which is 2/3 of a unit long, they have a nice relationship together.
Oh, is he just... Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, what if you take a wire that is half as long as the first wire? Okay. Well, what if it's 3/4 as long as the first wire? Okay, well, let's play them all together. Uh-oh, we've just discovered music.
Wow. So let's just get this straight then. So what you've done, Pythagoras has discovered a really abstract way of mathematics. We're talking about the history of Pythagoras and his life and how he's discovered this. And then we're also now cross-curricular over to musical notes. So I don't know if we've done this before, but you've definitely covered 3 subjects within about 10 or 15 minutes, quite in good detail.
I am the polyfiller of gaps in knowledge, I guess. We're just smearing it all over the wall and covering up every gap we can find.
I think so. We are the plasters, to put it in layman's terms.
So let's just think about what the hell Pythagoras has just done there. First of all, if we describe that in musical theory, what we're listening to is a major triad. Yeah. It's a major chord. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And specifically, that's A major that I'm playing.
Excellent. Beautiful.
But what is that in terms of maths? Well, it's 1 plus 2/3 plus 3/4 plus half. And if you take all those ratios and add them up in vibrating strings, you get harmony. And what Pythagoras demonstrates really rather convincingly is that basically what music is it's another way of experiencing maths, before my guitar drops over and gives me some rather discordant maths. So what we've got then is art, colour, which is the basis of art, is another way of experiencing maths. Would you agree with me?
Are you telling me that Jimi Hendrix is a mathematician?
I'm telling you that Jimi Hendrix is one of the most incredible mathematicians ever. Yes.
Okay, I see.
And if we take Pythagoras to be serious, if we take this idea that numbers do exist outside of human beings, then if we look at, say, the music of Bach, who is revered as the great composer of Western music, Can we analyze his music in a mathematical way? Well, we can. We can see that the notes that he is playing have strict relationships between them that are mathematical. And in fact, we can see that the way that Bach invents the tuning of a piano is based on Pythagoras' maths. Therefore, to expand this a little bit more, if we say that art and color is a way of experiencing maths visually, because the different wavelengths are being interpreted in different ways, then music is a way of experiencing maths aurally, A-U-R-A-L-L-Y, with your ears.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible.
And so can we take that a step further, is what Pythagoras would say, that all we are doing is experiencing maths in different ways.
Wow.
Color is visual maths. Music is oral maths. And for Pythagoras, the fact that these really neat ratios sound good to us, which they do, a major triad does sound nice, it's a pleasing sound, that's not a coincidence. That's because we're getting closer to experiencing true maths. So what does Pythagoras think he's doing when he's messing about with these triangles? He thinks he's finding another way to experiencing the true realm, which isn't human. Maths is not human. It doesn't belong to human beings if you're Pythagoras. It's something outside of human beings. It's another way of describing the universe of which we are just a part.
He is a wizard.
Isn't that weird?
He's a wizard. He is. He's a wizard. That's it. That's who he is.
He absolutely is.
That's incredible. He is. And
he's very much a wizard.
And rightfully so as well. That, I mean, obviously very well described and a story from your storytelling from yourself to put it in that way. But like, absolutely, is he a wizard? I didn't realize. I thought it was just Triangle Man and that was it. But
and this is the thing, and this is what you can lose in maths, where you're learning your times tables. Well, what the hell are you doing there? 7 times 7 equals 49. What? Where is that?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And the way in which maths can be described through so many realms is unbelievable. I mean, to actually, but here's the question though, and this maybe, I don't know if you've thought about this, but do you not lose the meaning of what art is or what music is if you start describing it in a mathematical, or not maybe describe it in a mathematical way, but definitely experience it in a mathematical way? Do you not lose it, or does it add? I can't work that out at the moment. I don't know what you think.
Well, that is an excellent question. I think there are two interpretations based on what you think maths is. I think if you think maths is an invention of human beings, then isn't art and music such a miracle, because we are just looking at the mind there.
I see.
All you are studying when you are studying music is how the mind can create loops and patterns in maths that have some kind of weird beauty to them. And so therefore the mind is just such an extraordinary thing. If you agree with Pythagoras and you think that numbers have an existence outside of the mind, then what you're doing is you are experiencing ultimate reality. And ultimate reality, you can describe it as the infinite, as the immortal, as the eternal. You can describe it as God, if that's a useful idea for you. But for Pythagoras, it's about a spiritual experience.
Right.
So do you lose something? This is why I think that nihilism's just too easy, the idea that there is nothing. I don't think you do lose anything. I think either way, it heightens your experience, because if you look at a Van Gogh, the way in which the colors sit together and the technique sits together can be seen as a form of maths, because it's all wavelengths. But there is some life to it. There's something else to it. But there has to be.
So it's interesting because obviously I'm come from a sporting background, and I was just thinking as you were describing this as well, like even in a sporting context, if someone takes a free kick, for example, in football, there are two ways to look at it. Someone scores, like David Beckham, a free kick against Greece when he got them into the World Cup, I think it was, and you could look at it in terms of if you take mathematics out, it's the curve and the beauty of it, but also you can look at the mathematical side of it, of how much spin was on the ball and the drag but I think this is where the line, that's where the line is, isn't it, between Pythagoras and using maths as an adjective is drawn. Do you know? And I think that's where mathematics is beautiful in everything, and it appears in everything, and it appears in chaos, and it appears in order, and I think this is what is fascinated me about all of this, and to even have music as described or as presented as a mathematical idea is just nuts. But obviously that's true, and it certainly feels
but it is true.
Yeah.
It is, and the same is absolutely true of sports. As you say, that free kick that I can picture in my mind with his bald head as it pings around the wall, that is a mathematical object that you can describe in mathematical formula. You can probably describe it quite easily, actually, because a curve is quite easy to describe on a graph.
Yeah.
But your point, therefore, are we looking at? Is maths looking at the world, or is the world looking at maths?
It's oof. Oh, that's wow. Have we just answered that, or are we letting listeners draw their own conclusions for that? Because
well, I'm gonna let off a little mind grenade here just to finish off this battery of artillery fire, which is to take us back to that koan that you mentioned before, the Zen koan. If a tree falls in a forest, is there anyone to hear it?
Yeah.
One of the points of Zen is that you can't logically answer everything in the world. And actually, this is true in maths. It's something called Gödel's incompleteness theory. Maths can't answer everything. You have to accept that some things are true without being able to prove them. And so, does a tree fall in the forest? If a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it? You can't actually answer that question in logic. It doesn't really work. So there needs to be something outside of logic, because you can still picture the question. So what are we doing there? Well, that's for next time.
I'm going to go have a lie down, I think.
Shall I let off another mind grenade? Yeah, sure. Theoretical physics is the world at which maths makes more sense than words. Anyway, let's get back to your topic now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, what a segue into my topic, because mine is. I mean, I have to say, before I go on to my topic now, we are definitely, in terms of school teaching, we are hitting every subject, I think, today, because I'm going to go into modern foreign languages. This is my area.
Excellent. Here we go.
So with the unification of Germany, I did have a theme. You might have forgotten after what Will was just described about Pythagoras. I did have a theme because of the unification day here in Germany. Is it the 3rd of October? So my one is we're looking at German dialects and German language dialects. Mm-hmm. So. German, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but German is the most spoken language in mainland Europe and all of Europe, actually. And there are it is, surprisingly. And I think when they have that statistic, it's to do with the spoken natively, because you could argue that English is spoken by more people, but not in a native sense. But natively speaking, German is the most spoken language in Europe, and would make sense because you've got 3 nations who have German as their official language: Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, but you've also got Liechtenstein, you've got Luxembourg as well, parts of Belgium, parts of even the Netherlands, I suppose, and even South Denmark, and parts of maybe Western Czech Republic as well. Like these areas that border Germany, it's in the heart of linguistic Central Europe. So it would make sense that most people speak German in Europe. But there are 230 million German speakers worldwide. And it's also a minority language, obviously in Italy, Slovakia, Poland, even Brazil, Russia, and Kazakhstan, surprisingly. It's even spoken in Texas in USA and parts of Pennsylvania. So it's all over the place. But linguistics say there's about 250 dialects of German worldwide. But you could argue that with most things, like if there's a collection of town and villages, like in the 1700s, like the dialect would change from village to village. We can see that in the UK with the sort of the concoction and variety and diversity of accents that exist. You've only got to travel with 15 or 20 miles between Liverpool and Manchester, and it sounds completely different, the English language. I mean, you could even go as far as like Newcastle and Sunderland, for example, the Mackhams and the Tackhams. You know, it's the same thing. Like it's the dialect is so varies so much because people either initially were so they stayed in the place where they grew up and died where they grew up, and they didn't move around much.
My favorite example of that is, what would you call a little bread roll?
Oh yeah, It's funny you say that because that's the line we're going to go down in German.
Is it?
It's similar. Yeah, it's similar. I would.
How funny!
It is. But I would call a bread roll. Bread roll. That I would call it a roll. That's my area. I would say it's a roll.
Yeah.
What would you call it?
I would say it's either a roll or a bap.
Oh, bap.
But bap is the word I would use.
Yeah.
But words like cob and balm are completely alien to me. But that's what I'm sure some of our listeners would say they would call a bread roll a balm.
Yeah, or a sarnie, maybe that's more of a flatbread, isn't it? But
same kind of thing, yeah, or batty.
But this is the kind of road we're going down, is that dialects are pretty varied. So what we're going to do is, I said, just before we record this, I sent Will how many files? 7 files on Discord to get ready to listen to.
Some homework to do.
So what we're going to do, we're going to look at some German dialects, and I want to see. Firstly, we're going to listen to them, and obviously see if Will can identify where in Germany or in Europe they are from, and you can play along at home as well. But the benefit of this is that the dialects, what's being said is the same each time by the same person who can say these dialects. So you can hear the nuances and differences of each dialect. So the first one we're going to look at, we need to set a standard. We can't just jump into this. So we're going to go with High German, which is Hochdeutsch. And for those who don't know, Hochdeutsch initially actually started, you'd think, this is a Misconception Corner. Where would you think it started, Will? In the North or the South Germany?
I mean, if it's High German, of course, high equals north, one would presume.
Yeah, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, that is. But yeah, where Germany is. But it's the Hochdeutsch actually started in the south of Germany, in the Alps regions.
Right.
But it's later.
So up in the high mountains.
Yes, and that's because you've got another German, which is Low German, which we'll look at some point. But Hochdeutsch is the one that is on the news, and all TV presenters have to make sure that they speak in, so that everyone in Germany can understand with little accent. So this is the baseline, and what you're about to hear now is a German saying the sentence, I'm going now to the bakery to get some bread rolls. I'll be back in a bit. So that's what that's what the translation is going to be.
Bread rolls.
Yeah, exactly. We're down the bread rolls. So so what Will was about to listen to now, and what you're about to listen at home, is the Hochdeutsch, the High German version of "I'm going now to the bakery to get some bread rolls. I'll be back in a bit."
Ich gehe jetzt zum Bäcker, ein paar Brötchen kaufen. Ich bin gleich wieder da.
Okay, that was completely understandable. Good for you is what I would say to Mr. High German, because I could understand him.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, it's quite weird if you're lucky enough to speak German, understand this will be much more interesting to you. But I think for those who are non-speakers of German, I think it will be interesting for everyone to see how the language is so diverse and varied across Germany and Europe, and to also understand that this happens in so many other languages as well. We're now going to go to the first example of a dialect. I've called it sample 1. And I want to see if Will can decipher where sample 1 is from. So here is the first dialect that I would like you to listen to.
Ik ga naar het glütjenbakker wat bollen kopen. Ik ben gelijk wieder da.
Okay, that sounds quite a lot like Arnold Schwarzenegger to me.
Oh, really?
That kind of get to the chopper type of way of speaking. Do you know what I mean by that? Ich bin schon wieder da. That kind of thing. So, and I know Schwarzenegger's Austrian. So I'm going to say we're talking Alpine.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so what you listened to there was Plattdeutsch. And this is Low German. And which is quite surprising because it was quite a strong dialect. And this is the German which is linked really closely to the Netherlands. So you'll find this strength of dialect across northern and northwestern Germany. But the thing is, the reason that we probably don't hear it much in that strength at the moment is because it's kind of dying out, this kind of a Plattdeutsch language. It's being overtaken by Hochdeutsch, which is actually quite similar to some of the dialects we're going to listen to, but particularly Plattdeutsch, which is Low German. And it was, because What you need to remember about German geography is that if you say Low German, it's not because it's further south, it's because it's nearer sea level. And Germany, from the south, is at its highest point. And in the north of Germany, like Holstein, I said it wrong. Schleswig-Holstein, there we go.
There you go.
Is further south, further north, but lower down and nearer sea level. So that's where Low German
it's
would be.
the opposite from the UK.
Yes.
In the UK, we think of the Highlands as being north because it's Scotland, but it's the other way around.
Exactly, but this is where Low German is, but it's dying out actually. A lot of this German. So, I suppose if you go to certain villages again, you would hear it more strong. But that is Plattdeutsch.
Well, now that we know that it's quite closely related to Dutch, or at least kind of along those lines, let's just have another listen to it.
Okay, let's go for it.
Ik ga naar het gluten bakken wat bollen kopen. Ik ben gelijk bij dat daar.
I mean,
it's got that kind of sing-song quality that Dutch has.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
It does. It's kind of rhythmic, isn't it?
It is, and there's a cadence that goes up and down a bit, which is a bit similar to Dutch. Yeah, okay, I can see that. That makes sense.
Okay, so that was sample 1. That was Plattdeutsch. So we're going to go to the second sample now. Will, this on your is a WAV file. It's sample 2. And we're going to take a listen to this one now.
Ich gehe jetzt zum Bäcker ein paar Semmel kaufen. Ich bin gleich wieder da.
Dude, what the hell was that? That sounded like slug German. That was kind of oozing out of his mouth. Kaufen, I think is what he said halfway through. Let me just listen to that bit again. Kaufen. Not kaufen, kaufen. Ugh. I have no idea where that's coming from. Having said Slugdeutsch is now going to be kind of ethnically, morally dubious if I say it comes from East Germany, isn't it?
Oh, right. Yeah, you're going to be just there. Considering the theme of this episode, especially from my side.
I have no idea.
Okay.
It's not very pleasing to me, so I've got no idea.
Okay.
North. Why not say the far north?
No, you're not. You can be more wrong. It's Bayerisch.
Is it?
As Bayerisch, yeah. So that's Bavarian German. So it's that type of German where if you listen to longer speeches of it in the southeast of Germany, that a lot of people from Munich would speak, that a lot of Hochdeutsch Germans wouldn't understand what the hell is going on. It's like if you spoke to someone from a part of Glasgow, you'd be like, "Heh, what?" It's that kind of German.
It is, absolutely. It's very, very strongly accented and not, I mean, Glaswegian's very similar because Glaswegian's not particularly aesthetically pleasing. It's not a very melodious accent, and nor is that. That was horrible.
It's horrible, isn't it? That's how I kind of felt for that. But what's really interesting is that Bayerisch Deutsch is, it's very similar, I suppose, to Cantonese and Mandarin. Written, you can say it the same way, like written German in that sense can be read by both Hochdeutsch and Bayerisch. But the way in which the vowels are spoken, it makes the dialect completely different in the same way that Cantonese and Mandarin use the same script but say different things. Bayerisch and Hochdeutsch is quite similar in that sense. So they often say that it's the nickname called Schriftdeutsch, which means written German. So the written German is the same, but it's pronounced extremely differently. But yeah, so that's
so interesting how that works, because it's, I mean, again, funnily enough, it's not that far off music. If you were to write down a musical score and, I don't know, give it to James, the music teacher, to play and give it to me to play, we'd come up with completely different ways of playing it that share similarities. It's interesting how that works.
It's crazy. And what I find with these, as we go through all these dialects, is that to someone who doesn't speak German at all, you can just hear that they're different. You might hear them as different languages. But if you can speak German, you will identify that it's German, and it probably would be more frustrating to you that you can't understand it. Like I get frustrated, I can't understand some Irish people speaking English sometimes. But I'm certain if I wasn't a native English speaker, it wouldn't bother me as much in that sense. I think it's just a different language. And I wonder if that's the case of a lot of German speakers throughout Europe.
Yeah, it's just beyond your grasp.
Yeah, right.
You can't quite get it. Yeah, it's interesting.
Okay, shall we go on to the third sample?
Yeah.
So you need to click sample 3, funnily enough.
Ich gehe Stiefel eben zum Bäcker ein paar Schrippen kaufen. Ich bin gleich wieder da.
Okay, sample 3 sounding more like Hochdeutsch to me.
Okay.
less kind of slippery and slimy. What that means for where it comes from, I don't know. For some reason, my immediate thought was Berlin and the Northeast.
He's nailed it.
I can't tell you why I thought
He's
that.
nailed it. You've got it. It's
Whee!
Berlin. That's Berlinerish. And there's something specific in there which you may have heard as from Berlin. And if you listen back to it, we'll play it one more time. But when you listen to it again, listen to how he says ich. It's not how Deutsch would say
what
ich.
it was.
So listen to it again, listeners, and you will hear how he says ich.
Ich gehe Stiefel eben zum Bäcker ein paar Schrippen kaufen. Ich bin gleich wieder da.
Oh, funny. So he's saying ick.
So he says Icke,
Isn't he?
Icke. Yeah, he's managed to get 2 syllables out of ich. Which, for those who don't know, that's I in German.
Yeah. Ich. But for some reason, I thought in Berlin they would say ish with a shell sound, sh. But no, it's Icke.
It's quite pointy.
Right.
It's quite pointy and very that kind of clicky sound.
Angular.
Yeah, so the German for now is yet, but it's spelled T-Z-T at the end, J-E-T-Z-T. But a Berlinerischer, that's really about a Berlinerischer, would say a Jetzer. They would really get the emphasis on the end bit where the T and the Z's mix. So the Jetzer. So that's the Berlin way.
It's not a million miles off kind of Scandinavian ways of saying it. Ikke, because Ikke means no in Norwegian. But that kind of pointy, angular, but still a little bit sing-song sounds very Scandinavian to me.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's our Eastern German entry for this. But we're going to go on to sample 4. Another dialect. I nearly said it then by accident. Another dialect. The sample 4 dialect coming your way right now.
Ich gehe jetzt zum Bäcker paar Brötli posten. Ich bin gleich wieder da.
That doesn't sound like a serious language, and therefore I can only presume it's Swiss or something like that.
He's got it, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
That's Schweizerdeutsch, yeah. Oh dear. So, I mean,
they said xenophobia never gets you anywhere.
I mean, I've got to question that now. Why was that so silly, and why was that therefore Swiss?
Let's re-listen to it and see if I can pick out the Swissness of it.
Okay.
Ich gehe jetzt zum Bäcker paar Brötli posten. Ich bin gleich wieder da.
I don't know what sounds Swiss about that. I don't know. I something to do with the postler, the way there's kind of a whole chunk of sounds together that it doesn't. It sounds kind of verging on French. It's kind of a mishmash of sounds going together.
I think I can help you here a little bit. Why you think that sounds Swiss? So, like a lot of Swiss is like grüßi. They put that e at the end. Which that e, like grüßi is like hello or greetings or something like that. So that e, and they have a lot of that e at the end, and I think that's what maybe sounds therefore less serious. That like in Australia, like for example, in Australian English dialect, where everything sounds like a question. It's a little bit. Yeah. It has that kind of inclination to it. In Swiss because they have that e at a lot of the end of its German. So. Maybe that's why you thought it was a little bit silly, but the link, it's silly, therefore it's Swiss. It's still
I think it's odd is the word I would use.
Right,
it's odd, and therefore it's Swiss because I find Switzerland quite an odd country. I think it's far more. I mean, it's in the middle of Europe, and yet it's not in the European Union. They don't use the euro. They don't have an army. They don't have many things that are very European, and yet they are quite clearly European people. It's a very interesting place to me, Switzerland.
I think we have to save that for another episode. I think we could save Switzerland.
I think
so. Okay. Right, last one, sample 5. We've got a few other extra little bonus things to play, but this is now sample 5, and Will, I think you will find this one relatively interesting. So here's sample 5.
Ik ken no na baka kwan bole kepe. Ik bin Dialects verder.
What the hell was that? I'm going to listen to it straight back again.
Okay, let's go for it again.
Ik ken no na baka kwan bole kepe. Ik bin Dialects verder.
Right. There is something about that that sounds a bit pigeony. And I don't mean the bird, but I mean Pidgen. I think that's how you spell it.
Yeah.
Kind of like a Creole type. It sounds like it's been disconnected from the motherland for a long time.
Right.
And has met other languages on its road. So where does that place us in the world? Is that like Brazilian German or something?
Oh, I see where you're going, the line you're going down. This is Frisian.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So
So that's the one that's not far off English.
Yeah, that's the one that's quite closely linked to English. Yeah, which is really weird to hear that. Wow. So, but this is the one that's spoken on Heligoland, to go back to our first point. So the Frisian language, just to get a bit of background here, so the Frisian language are closely related group of the West Germanic languages and are spoken by about 500,000 Frisian people who live on the south fringes of the North Sea in the Netherlands and Germany. It's the closest, they say it's like the closest living relative of English, and some believe that the latter of English originated from Frisian. So actually it's Frisian that came first, and English was a section of that, and then was mixed up with French and other Latin languages. But it has been known, or it's possible, to, if you could speak Old English, you could just about hold a conversation with someone in Frisian as well. Which is kind of gives you a bit of historical context of the language also. But this is what I'm going to end with. And I think all of our listeners, or most of our listeners, are going to be native English speakers. So I'm going to set this one up. You're about to hear a 30 or 40 second clip of someone speaking rural Frisian. But what it sounds like, and I want you to get this in your head before I play it, what it sounds like, I want you to imagine that you are not an English speaker and you can't speak English at all. And you walk up to someone, maybe he's just from outside Barnsley in Yorkshire, and he's got a farm, and you're having a conversation with him and you're trying to understand him. So you can't speak English, you've gone to Barnsley in Yorkshire, and this is the conversation that you hear from that Yorkshireman in Barnsley.
In Duitsland, mooi man. Die hebben een keer op een snor naar mij uit rijden en ik denk, zij is niks. Ben we op naar grijzen en zeiden, steen nu verder grijzen. Toen mocht je er nog niet in, hè. Stel de douane er nog voor. Ik zei, nou, ben je van Duitsland? Nee toch, zei je. In dit Duitsland? Zongen ze er wel even iemand, hè. Nou, zo kan het proberen. Zo de douane stel er nog voor, hè. Dat is lang dit, hè. En ik zei tegen die kerel, ik zei, ik ga alle papieren wel, maar ik zei, met niks, maar ik zei.
Well, that's uncanny. That is really uncanny.
It's weird, isn't it?
That is so close to being intelligible, but it is unintelligible to me. But the fact that we are approaching so close, it is very, very foreign, but very, very similar at the same time. And that is what the definition of uncanny is. It's an odd, because you can kind of get the gist of where he's going with it with some of the words, but then to understand overall what he's saying, that is weird. It's
weird, isn't it? And that's what I think, that Frisian language, you can it's, you know, there's as Nelson Mandela says, if you speak to a man a language he knows, it goes to his head, and you speak in his language, it goes to his heart. Like when I listen to that back, it kind of hits both. It's really weird. It's kind of like on his journey between the two.
It's odd. Yeah. If you speak a language that he doesn't quite know, but almost does, then you hit him where? In like the gallbladder or something, and he gets very scared and frightened and runs away.
Somewhere around there.
Very odd. But I mean, so my master's degree was in medieval history, and in that I looked at some of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle in the original Old English, and read some of Beowulf in the original Old English, and listened to Beowulf being performed in the Old English. And it's very similar to Frisian because it's at the very, very threshold of intelligibility. You can understand bits of it, but it's kind of isolated islands in a sea of unintelligibility. It's a very strange experience. Okay, Shall we head over to number time then?
I think we got to head straight into number time. So I'm ready to be. It's Pythagoras. Oh God! And numbers. Do these numbers mean anything? Or are they pure numbers? Oh, okay. Fire away. Let's see how it goes.
As if we hadn't had enough number time.
Right.
Here comes more. And you're right. The theme is Pythagoras, and the number is 1.
Oh, for God's sakes! Is it a pebble?
It's not a pebble, but it is similar to a pebble in that I have already mentioned it. It's one thing that can never be eaten.
One thing that can never be eaten?
Yeah. Pythagoras said there is one thing you must never, ever eat.
You must never... He didn't... Beans was one.
Beans.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, I remembered it.
Never,
yes.
ever eat beans.
I remembered it. I've got a memory. Okay. What the hell is that about? What's he talking about there? That's mental.
It is mental, but this is the great thing because you can agree with him on many, many things, but there are some ways in which he is, after all, just a mental wizard. And one of them was with beans. He said that you shouldn't eat beans. It's not entirely clear why, but it might be because they're too human, is what he thought. There's a story that he sowed some beans and then pulled them up a few days later. And what he saw looked too close to a human fetus, the germinated seed when it starts to grow.
Oh God! So it
looks too much like a human fetus.
So it looked like human, so therefore you shouldn't eat it, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yes. If it looks like humans, that must be because if we think of like a mountain looks like a triangle, therefore a mountain is at least in some ways a triangle.
Okay.
That's the kind of thing that he's thinking of here.
Right. Got it.
It looks like a human, therefore it must be going along the same kind of evolutionary lanes that lead to human beings, and so it's wrong.
I could kind of see maybe with the texture of it in an essence, it's quite squidgy, it's quite squishy, and humans can be quite squishy.
It is. Yeah, quite squidgy. And Aristotle kind of took the piss out of him and said that Pythagoras didn't eat beans because they look like testicles or because they look like the gates of hell or because they don't have any hinges or because they're too similar to the nature of the universe. So he's already being ragged on 100 years after his death by Aristotle. This is quite clearly mental.
I mean, the thing as well, like living at these sort of time, if everything just seems like a massive acid trip and the arguments they're having and just cussing each other down, it just seems just mental. Oh, Aristotle's going, Pythagoras, he's such an idiot, he doesn't eat beans because they might be hinges. Like, what? That's an incredible sentence.
But it is an incredible time because you're at the very birth of kind of human thought. And so people don't really know what thought is. They're just making it up as they go along. And so if in some ways you come across an idea that's right, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, doesn't mean that everything else you're going to come up against is right. And a really good example of this kind of playful nature in which they're discovering thought and logic is Plato tries to define what a human being is. And Plato looks around at the world and looks at human beings and thinks it's a human being. The best description he's got is it is upright. So it walks on 2 legs.
Yeah.
And it's featherless.
Okay.
And it has life. It's an upright creature that is featherless and has life.
Right.
And so Diogenes, another philosopher, comes along and he's got a chicken in one hand and he plucks all the feathers off it and chucks it on the floor and goes, "Look, Plato, a man." And everybody starts pissing themselves laughing because that's quite funny.
That is quite funny, but what a dick, but that is funny. Oh, God. This kind of say like this era, this is the era of trial and error. That's what this is.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. It is. That is 100% what it is. It's trying to figure out kind of what we are actually doing here. And that's the birth of human beings, as distinct from prehistoric man who doesn't quite have the same concept of self.
So I can understand why eating beans might be weird.
Yeah.
To some people.
But the funny thing is that, Plato is definitely wrong about a man, like upright, featherless.
Yeah, that's
biped doesn't make any sense. But Pythagoras is also wrong about beans because broad beans, which is the ones he's specifically against, really good. You can make a nice dip out of some broad beans and garlic, and it's not going to curse your soul or anything.
I don't think it does.
So he can access this realm of, again, if we're taking his idea seriously, like 1 + 1 will always equal 2. That's neither right nor wrong. That just is. 1 + 1 will always equal 2. Doesn't matter if you're a human being or a dog or a chicken or a wave in the ocean or a quasar exploding in the night sky billions of miles away. 1 + 1 will always equal 2.
Yeah.
But broad beans are not evil.
No,
and so
he's missed the mark on that one. In the trial and error era, he's hit the error section on that one.
Very much so. And that's because he's a man, and that's what we do. We get some things very, very right, and we get some things completely wrong, and it's all a big laugh at the end of the day.
Shall we jump straight into my number time, Will?
Yes. Yeah.
So we know my theme, and I'm going to, on the assumption of my theme, my clue is tectonics and the number 30.
Oh dear. Because Germany is not renowned for its tectonic activity.
Oh, are you a bit of a hitch?
I mean, like, so what? You got Italy pushing him from the south, doing a bit of tectonic nonsense.
You got the Swiss in between it, though, haven't you?
You do have the Swiss in between, doing whatever they do. I'm gonna say there are 30 earthquakes every 100 years in Germany.
Oh, that's not a bad idea, but it's wrong, unfortunately. And you're going to be really surprised to hear this, but there are 30 volcanoes in Germany.
What? No, there are.
There are 30 volcanoes in Germany.
Really?
Really, yeah. So
where?
Let me go through it. So one of the extra little bits, so I did put an extra clue, but I thought I'd jump straight into it, was the Eifel, which is a region just sort of south of Cologne, Bonn, that sort of area. But there are 30 volcanoes in Germany. Most of them are in the mountainous Siebengebirge. There you go. It's quite a tricky one. And the Eifel areas. But one particular part of the Eifel is even named after the volcano. It's called the Volcan Eifel, which stands for volcanic Eiffel.
Oh.
So
well, if I'd known that.
but the thing is, Germany's volcanoes may look harmless, but experts and volcanologists have said that they could actually erupt one day. Like,
what?
Genuinely is like a possibility. But it shouldn't erupt, they say, particularly for like a couple of 1,000 years. They're pretty dormant in that sense, that they're not going to just suddenly explode. Okay. But don't get too comfortable, because it does lead on to something else. But there is actually in Germany something called the volcano route. I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's a volcano route where the route in Germany through the Eifel goes past 350 eruption sites.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, at 39 main sort of stopping points, stations. And it has and at each of these stations, it has a huge, I mean, if you've never been to the Eiffel and you want to go on like a weekend trip away, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful part of the countryside in Germany. And there are some volcanic geological sites that you can visit, which really does give evidence that Germany is a volcanic area, not necessarily active to a certain extent, but either a history of volcanism or to a certain extent, still some volcanic activity luring deep beneath the crust. But it's definitely, so you can see things like volcanic lakes, some quarries, there are sinkholes, there are even walls of volcanic rubble, geysers and big volcano domes and hot springs. And it's quite a surreal landscape in certain parts of the Eifel, but it has huge amounts of volcanicity. It really does exist in Germany, which is crazy because, as you've already said, like, I didn't think there were volcanoes in Germany. We're right in the middle of a plate boundary, the European plate. So why would there be volcanoes? But here's the thing. There's a place called Lacher See, which is a lake in the Eifel that sits on top of Germany's super volcano.
What?
Yeah.
We're not just talking about piddly little volcanoes. There's a super one.
There is. So you might have heard the super volcano in terms of Wyoming in USA. Is
is it Yellowstone or Yosemite?
That's it. Yeah. So the one that's in Wyoming Yosemite National Park, and the crater itself is 120 kilometers wide, and it is apparently an imminent eruption could happen. But then, geologically speaking, imminent could mean next 5 seconds or the next 5,000, 10,000 years. It's geologically speaking, like times and eras go on for millions and millions and billions of years. But this super volcano, which is, I think it's significantly deep under Germany, a lot deeper than the super volcano in Wyoming, which is evidently clear with the hot geysers above it. But it was predicted to erupt in 2012, and it didn't. And we're 10 years later. Jesus.
Okay, that's what? I thought they were meant to be all dormant or extinct, but no,
it's pretty active.
Okay,
but it's because of this this area, the Lac is which is buried in the Eifel Mountain region. It's down the road from something called the Andernach geyser, and it's the highest cold water geyser in the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there is...
Caused by that.
So instead of going to Iceland or New Zealand for your volcanoes and earthquake excitement junkie thrilled holiday, you just go to the Eifel in Germany and you have the same experience.
So, I mean, it's... As you mentioned that, I thought as we drive down the Autobahn 3 fairly often because it leads down towards Munich and then on to Slovakia to visit my wife's family. And on the way down, as you go past the Eifel, you go past a mountain called Drachenfels. Yeah. Which means Dragon Mountain.
I mean...
And I've always thought that's very conical. That really looks like it could be a volcano. So therefore, it was a volcano.
Yeah.
Presumably, because it's part of this Eifel region. Does that mean that the Dragon Mountain is just the magma inside? And what they're saying is don't go inside, there's fire inside that mountain.
Yeah, the warning's built into the actual name construction itself. Yeah.
It is.
Don't.
And so the dragon is just the exploding mountain.
Yeah, exactly. And in a lot of places, a lot of things are named like that. But yeah, so if it's got Dragon Mountain, definitely. It's obviously it's breathing fire somewhere, or it has it in the past. So be careful because it could erupt at any moment. And yeah. So if you're driving past the Eifel...
yeah, keep an eye out.
Keep an eye out.
Have you come across the kind of long-term nuclear warnings?
No, but...
Does that ring a bell?
It doesn't, but...
This reminds me... Well, I'm going to take you there.
Please do.
I did just have another sip of coffee in case you're wondering where this has come from. When people were designing nuclear power plants, they realized we've got this nuclear waste that will still be around in 10,000 years' time. But if we look back 10,000 years into the past, we don't have any messages from those people. Like, how can we possibly leave a warning here?
Oh my God.
That will last 10,000 years beyond the end of our civilization? And so the kind of ideas they came up with were very, very interesting. One was to try and breed a kind of cat that glows in the dark when it's near radioactive material, and then invent stories to say, if you see a cat glowing, stay away.
That's incredible.
Which is mental. Or to leave signs on the front saying, this is not a place of honor. Nothing valued is here. What is here was dangerous and repulsive to us. The danger is to the body and it can kill. The form of the danger is an emanation of energy. This place is best left alone and left uninhabited.
I've got something.
Doesn't that sound like a curse?
But I've got something here, and that sign and this idea could be counterintuitive. Because if you have that...
that's the problem.
If you have that and I read that, I go, oh, that sounds really interesting. I want to find out some more things about it. And then you go and you investigate. And then how have we discovered things with artifacts and archaeological things over time? By digging things out of the ground.
Exactly.
So I think... Exactly. So my idea for that would be just to leave it the fuck alone and put no sign that anything was ever there. That's kind of how I would do it.
But then if you do that, then of course people will stumble across it because that's what people do. Oh. So it's a really odd, tricky problem. But it raises this kind of issue of how do you leave a warning for the deep past? And one way is to say dragons live in this mountain. Don't go in there.
Exactly.
Because if you do, you'll be burnt by fire. It's exactly the same thing. Very, very interesting that we come across the same idea, but from completely different viewpoints.
I see.
My personal favorite solution, by the way, was that of the atomic priesthood, which is to make the Catholic Church, but all about nuclear energy. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for accompanying us this week on our trip down Gaps in Knowledge Lane. If you, as I said before, if you do have any ill side effects from listening to this episode, then please do get in touch at gapsinknowledge@outlook.com. Or should you wish to find us on Facebook, then just search for Gaps in Knowledge Podcast and we will appear.
And if you want to check us out on other platforms, we're also on Twitter at Gaps Podcast. And if you search for us on YouTube, we post all of our episodes there as well.
Well, see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.